there's social, environmental, and political implications in our transportation choices. And for me, I looked at what I could do on a local level, and that was to try and build a community, work on building a community that the car wasn't an essential part of, an essential element, essential requirement of being part of the community, where people could get around without the car. And I think we've done pretty well here in Port Townsend.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaia Donaldson. I'm in Port Townsend, Washington, at the start of a bike trail, and I'm here with a person who bikes, well, in a special way. I'm with Scott Walker. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
You're a councilor here in the city of Port Townsend.
City councilman, a new one.
Well, welcome aboard. Thank you. But I'm here to ask you about something that goes longer than that. You advocated for bike trails quite a while back. How'd that come about?
I've been in biking for most of my life. It's not the only thing I do. I do a lot of walking. I have owned a lot of cars, but I saw one of the ways that the world needed to be, that the world problems could be changed was building more walkable, bikeable community. That environmental problems really have a close root with our addiction to the automobile.
You're right. And you should know, how many cars have you owned?
I'm only guessing somewhere between 60 and 80.
So you know for sure, don't you?
I still have a number of cars, but I ride my bike a lot.
So back to the solutions here.
Well, the solution, first of all, is to get the facilities out there that people can feel comfortable, that are convenient, that are safe and inviting. And the City of Port Townsend has done a great job of building trails and bike lanes, sidewalks, and it's amazing. As soon as we build a facility, it sprouts people, it blooms people. You think that they weren't there before, and suddenly the demand shows that it was obviously there.
So you're putting in bike trails, bike lanes along your highways? I mean, just a word about what is that?
A lot of the town is undeveloped, platted streets but undeveloped, and we've taken those undeveloped streets and designated many of them as non-motorized use only.
Oh, wow. That's excellent.
So there's lots of short connections that connect neighborhoods through the woods, that connect two streets that normally would be open to the car, but we've made sure that they weren't open to the car, that the car drives the long way around and the bicycle and pedestrian can walk through.
Oh, that's cool.
Kids can walk to school here comfortably, safely, conveniently. People do a lot of errands on bicycles. I ride my bike for errands a lot.
So how far are you from whatever, the center of town or the center of where you need to be?
Nowhere in this town is very far from anywhere else. But the problem with this town is we have a lot of steep hills.
Yes.
So that prevents people from riding their bike whenever they could.
So about the hills, because that's of course a challenge in my community in Nevada City.
I don't know it, but okay.
It's all over, everywhere. So this is part of your solution?
Yes, I have several bikes, but this one is the one I use for doing errands if I've got a lot of things I need to do in a day and don't really need to drag around my car with all my tools in it. I'm an electrical contractor, so I have 1,000 pounds of tools.
So you don't have your 1,000 pounds of tools on the trailer on this one, but when you have light errands.
If I have light errands like going to the bank or going grocery shopping or visiting a number of people, post office, whatever, this is a great vehicle to use.
Okay.
It's an early bicycle early electric bicycle adaptation. I took my old mountain bike before it was obsolete and added on a Curie motor, which is no longer produced, but you can still find them out there.
Just a little electric motor.
A little electric motor.
That you just added on.
Added on. It's chain driven. There's a little chain here that you can't see.
With little sprockets, yeah.
Grabs the spokes of the back wheel, and then the battery is here.
Got wiring up here. So you did this whole thing yourself?
No, I hired someone else to do it.
Help. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
I hired someone
else.
This is the battery.
What kind of battery?
It's just a lead acid battery, a very basic one, and you've got your hand on the controller.
All right.
Just a
what does the
little
controller
thumb controller. The
do?
thumb controller turns the juice on for the motor. Turns it on and off. You just push the thumb controller down. And let me turn the switch on here. And you push the thumb controller down, the bike will take off.
Whoa, well, okay, hold on. I want to try it out in a bit, but before we get carried away with that, off. Is this one that you can also pedal? Do you also pedal?
It's still a bicycle.
Aha.
So if the battery goes dead, I can
You
still
can-
pedal. And in fact, I pedal it all the time. I pedal it downhill without the motor, and I pedal it uphill with the motor assist. So going uphill, I'm doing 12 to 15 miles an hour. It's a little shocking for cars to see me doing that much speed uphill.
You see, they see
But
you
I'm not
doing
alone in
this.
this town, so there's a lot of people that are on electric bicycles.
And do you find, so you've got the assist to help you back up the hills, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got some of that, you go to
Right.
town, you come back, you run your errands. It's a little battery, right?
It's a little battery. It's heavy, just like all batteries.
Right. How long, when you go home and you need to charge it, what do you do?
I have a little charger. I brought it along with me.
Okay.
It's fairly simple. This is the charger, and each of the other
Like
two are
any
the
old
cords.
brick, any power brick.
Very
kind of
simple.
thing. Okay.
It costs a couple cents a night to recharge the battery.
Really? How long do you have to keep it charging? You don't
I plug
know.
it in and go to bed.
Because it'll turn off once it's charged?
Yes.
So, like any lead acid batteries, the kind you don't want to get to the bottom. Is that right?
It doesn't have a memory, so it's okay to drain it down and then
Okay.
run it back up. It's got a cutout switch that prevents it from completely draining it all the way down.
Okay.
It'll run, 12 to 15 miles around town at this point. It's 3 years old now.
12 to 15 miles on battery only, or your
No,
combination?
I'm
your
pedaling
combination.
with it. Yes, I'm
okay.
pedaling with it.
Okay.
It's not a real strong setup, but it's enough
sounds
to
like-
go up and down the hills, up the hills just fine. It almost flattens the town.
Flattens? That's a fabulous notion.
It's like living on the Great Plains. There's no hills here with this.
Whoa. Well,
So
that's exciting.
all those people who think, bicycling's too much work.
Right. Or don't have
this
the
takes-
strength
This
for it,
takes
or
the work
whatever.
out of it, and you're still getting exercise. Perhaps not as much as if you were riding a standard bicycle uphill.
Sure. But there's some of us who are going to say, I won't ride a bike. I mean, I know that the steep hills where we are, it's like, it's a little too, it would take too long or too formidable for me to try and do that. Do you ever try to, cart stuff, like your groceries? How do you deal with the stuff
I've got
you
the
want to
rack
carry?
here on the back of the bicycle.
Okay.
And then a couple of traditional panniers,
Little
which I think is
saddlebag
French
kind of things?
for bags or
Yeah,
saddlebags
yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that. They hang on the back end, and I'll drag home a lot of stuff. A week's worth of groceries. That's pretty easy to get on here.
Do you ever have or do any of the folks in your town just have a little trailer that they run behind it?
Oh yeah, there are plenty of people who have trailers behind
So
their
that you
bicycles.
could really just cart that way.
And I think that there's some trailers behind electric bicycles. In fact, I talked to a lot of people who want to set up their bicycles with electric assist and have a trailer. So it's
gonna be
a
nice.
trend that's beginning to generate some enthusiasm here.
Now I have to ask, because you are in a it rains. What do? You just give good coverage to
Well,
yourself,
I've got
or what do you
fenders
do?
on here.
Right, so you don't get splatters on you.
And I've got rain gear that
Okay.
generally I keep in the panniers, rain pants and a raincoat.
Way
Full
to
set of rain gear costs still a whole lot less than a month's worth of gasoline in a car.
Wow, that's a good point. That's a good point.
This whole setup, this bicycle, you can, it's an old bike. You can probably get an old bike like this for a couple $100. You probably have one sitting around.
A lot of people do.
And the
Yes.
setup, including the labor, was $500. So I don't have a whole lot involved in this vehicle that I use a lot.
That's, I mean,
That's a fairly
that's
inexpensive
pretty
vehicle.
affordable for a vehicle that
And
gets you
then
around town a lot.
2 cents a day to recharge it.
In Washington State, where you have good cheap electricity.
Okay, so
now,
4 cents a day
some of the
in
rest
Hawaii.
of us, it's still, that's affordable.
I
It
think
sure
so,
beats.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about how many miles you can go in this compared to one trip to town in your gasoline.
And how many people ride around in a single occupant vehicle
Mm-hmm.
carrying nothing but their purse or their wallet?
That's the majority
And
of
how many
trips.
people could stand, how many people drive to their athletic club and then get on the bicycle
Get on the
or
bicycle
treadmill?
thing, right, instead of just
And
doing
I
this.
understand why they do that in many places, because there aren't the facilities. It's not just the bicycle, we need to build the facilities also.
Right.
A walkable, bikeable community is one half of the formula. The other half is getting the bicycle.
So if you're going to give advice to people who want to look at doing what you're doing, you got any little tips or any little reminders just here?
First thing is relearn how to ride a bicycle.
Okay.
Because many people get on this find that they're a little shocked by the amount of power the bike adds to their biking.
Their wheeling, right.
And you still have the same rules of the road that many people perhaps didn't learn well when they were kids, but you need to relearn them. How, not just the rules of the road, but the safety rules of how to interact with cars. You want to be seen, you want to be predictable, and you want them to understand what you're doing. You don't want to be weaving in and out of traffic. You don't want to surprise them with the power you've got. They're thinking, oh, here comes a bicycle, when in fact it's a bicycle with a motor on it.
Yeah.
And they don't see that motor.
That's true. I mean, this is a bicycle. I mean, with your gear, whatever. That's good advice. I think that in our automobile-centric culture, most people don't get to see bicyclers maybe differently in your community, but we drivers need to begin to get educated and aware. And I realize that probably you as the bicyclist have to sort of be driving defensively.
The person who spends most of their time in a car doesn't really understand what's going on the edge of the road.
Yeah.
And not until they get on the edge of the road themselves. And the more people we get on bicycles, the more people will understand the dangers that a bicyclist puts themselves in, and the need for facilities to help make it safer for them.
Well, I commend you. You've done that, and you're doing that in your community.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Well,
it
what do you
still frustrates
envision?
me.
What do you want? Where do you want to go?
Well, I envision a town that's walkable and bikeable for everybody. There's a folding together of a lot of problems, environmental problems, social problems. We don't have the money for other things because we pour it into our street network. We don't have, how much traffic is generated in the morning for parents taking their children to school because it's unsafe for the children to walk to school because the parents are taking so many children to school. It's like this loop.
Right,
so you build the facility so that it's safe for kids to walk to school, and suddenly you've reduced a tremendous amount of traffic at that 8 to 9 o'clock hour. So what do I envision? I just put the pieces together a little at a time until we have a community and then a society where the car is not essential.
That's great.
I don't want to outlaw it, but
no,
we just don't want it to be an essential part, and that's what's going on in most communities now. You're not a participant unless you own a car.
We've built our societies around that. So what I envision is, from what you're saying, is cultures where we've got car sharing and we have transit and we have a lot of other ways where we're not just a single person in a car that we have so much full of right now. And you pick up and go.
It's a folding together of a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. The bicycle, the foot. You know, every trip begins and ends as a pedestrian.
That's true. That's true.
Whether you're on a bicycle or not, as the longer share of the trip. In this town, we've got the transit is set up to take bicycles on it. So you can go from one end of in fact, the county is set up that way. You can go from one end of the county to the other on the transit with your bicycle and then take your bicycle off and finish your trip.
Great.
So you're really not restricted in this community to owning a car. The horizon is a little wider here. We include everyone on the footpaths and everyone that has a bicycle.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your work in helping this to happen and to have it continue to happen as you're there in City Council. And now I'm going to ask for a favor. I've never ridden an electric bike. Could I try it?
You may. I'm happy to have anyone try it.
Okay. How do I do it?
It's a standard bicycle.
Okay.
That's what I said before. It's got the brakes.
Yeah.
And your shifters are here. They're thumb shifter and a finger shifter, one on each one.
Okay.
Generally, when I'm using it in electric mode, I just shift the front derailleur, the front sprockets, up and down. I leave the back one in the middle. You don't need all the gears with the electric assist. So here's the switch, turns it on.
Yeah. Okay.
There's the button that gives you the extra power, and I recommend to people when they first try it to start by pedaling it like a bicycle and then add the power in.
Okay.
Because the power will be surprising.
Okay. Okay, here we are. Okay.
So pedal first and then add some power.
Okay, here we go.
Go ahead and add the power now.
Woo! Oh, wow!
You're allowed to keep, you can keep pedaling.
What a treat.
She's gone.
I'm sold.
So, paddle at the same time.
Scott, this is fabulous. Whoa. I didn't change the derailleurs, so it...
Yeah, if you don't, once you get going, you need to add the
which
the
is
derailleur,
with the thumb one?
Move the derailleur up to the higher gear. The left hand, push
Got
the
it.
thumb. She's gonna run my battery down.
Scott, that is so fun. I mean, you've transformed my possibilities. Now I think I could think about an electric bike. That is cool. What in the world got you going with making walkable, thinking about trails and bike trails and walkable city? I mean,
It goes way back, Janaia. I looked at the world situation, I looked at the local situation, and I saw that at base in both rural, urban, local, and international problems was was an element of our transportation system. And I looked at that because I wanted to figure out what I could do to make a healthier world.
That's big. I mean, to
So
nail
yes,
it as transportation
I've been
is...
accused of trying to boil the ocean. So rather than trying to boil the ocean, I'm just trying to boil Puget Sound. Okay. I think that when we look at all the world's problems, whether they're social or environmental, political, international political, or the wars we're going through right now, we can see an element of our transportation system involved in all of them.
Well, our transportation, of course, has been built on all this nice petroleum.
Yes.
Yeah?
Our transportation system's been built on cheap oil. Yeah. Many people have predicated their life choices of where they live on cheap oil. Lots of people buy that 5-acre piece outside of town, and a lot of the money people disappear out into the hinterlands outside towns and abandon those urban centers.
Because the cars make the roads. Actually, the roads make it available.
The roads make it available, but the cars are cheap enough to drive. Yeah. The fuel's cheap enough that people can drive 20 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles to work. Yeah. And use the urban center just as their place of business, but not actually as their place of commerce or their place of living. Let's put it that way. It's their place of commerce, but not their place of living. Yeah. You know, a while ago, I tripped over this thought that what the purpose of cities was, and the purpose of cities is to minimize travel distances and maximize the opportunities for exchanges, whether they be...
What a novel idea. No, go ahead, yes.
To minimize travel distances and to maximize exchange opportunities, whether they're impromptu or planned commercial exchanges. And what we've got now with the cheap fuel driving our commercial system is that a lot of those travel distances or a lot of that travel is breaking up the ability for us to have the exchange opportunities. We've got 5-6 lane highways running through the middle of where we do
and we
our
are
exchanges.
totally in boxes, not relating to each other, not talking to each other. I mean, the whole social fabric has shredded.
Yes.
With
this,
this
as
isolation.
I say, that there's social, environmental, and political implications in our transportation choices. And for me, I looked at what I could do on a local level, and that was to try and build a community, work on building a community that the car wasn't an essential part of, an essential element, essential requirement of being part of the community, where people could get around without the car. And I think we've done pretty well here in Port Townsend.
How are you doing it?
How are we doing it?
And how do you envision it, where that could go?
I used to think it took elected officials to make it happen. It does ultimately take elected officials, but it takes leadership on the part of community members, building coalitions of people who understand the issues and are strong advocates for a clear vision of what to do and how to get to what I think of as a walkable, bikeable community.
So you're asking for the people to lead, but in a very focused way.
If the people will lead, the leaders will follow. We've heard that before, right?
Yes, yes.
And in this town, we've got a very strong non-motorized transportation advisory board. We've got a number of other advocacy groups that work for walking and bicycling, and they do exciting, fun things. And
like?
Give us some ideas. Got institutional inertia right now.
Wow. I mean, most communities, I mean, that's ahead of most communities to have a
I'll
group
say
like
that it took a long time, and I got very very ill in the middle of it. I was pushing very hard for 15 years before a shovel was turned over, but in that period of time we developed a plan that said which streets could be open to what level, which streets would become pedestrian friendly. There's details still to be worked out. We've institutionalized who can develop what and to what standards, and sidewalks are going in some places, but the trail connectors are starting to fall into place, and you see people walking a lot more than you used to, and you see people riding their bikes a lot more.
So did you, when your group did the planning, were you looking at, you were thinking ahead into what could be good bike routes throughout town? Is that, or just what you could make use of? I mean, how did you decide?
Well, it's interesting. 2 or 3 of us sat down one day with a map and said, well, this right away here, it's not open, and it would make a great connecting route, and well, we want to get between this use area and this use area. How can we do that safely? And ultimately we ended up using some federal and state funding that's dedicated for what's called Safe Routes to School, and that's a fund that I think a lot of communities have available to them.
Safe Routes for
Safe
School?
Routes to School.
To school, okay.
Yes.
Right.
But if you think about it, many routes are, in fact, every route could be considered a route to school, depending on where you lived.
Sure,
but
sure.
We focused a lot of the attention on the arterials and the collector streets in town, and then fed the smaller neighborhoods into those larger collectors and arterials with trails.
Okay, okay.
Ultimately, I hope to see the system protected, but I also see that there's this continuing fight between what the car wants for its space and what people want for social space. And we can either plan for people and places or cars and traffic. And I like to think that I'm helping to plan for people and places, with the car as an adjunct to accessing those places.
How else can you envision a community might do that? Right now you're setting out land, trails, spaces, and eventually maybe sort of having non-automobile regions, I would expect.
I won't say that we'll exclude the automobile, but my goal would be to calm the automobile traffic down to a point where it's uncomfortable being in among pedestrians if there's a pedestrian concentration.
So
they have a term for that. It's called a woonerf. It's a woonerf. It's
woonerf.
Woonerf. W-O-O-N-E-R-F. It's, I believe, a Dutch word for a pedestrianized street.
Aha. Okay.
Cars are allowed on it, but it's full of pedestrians.
That's a notion. I mean, they're much in Europe, I understand, much less sort of automobile happy than we are in terms of having them taking over the space. I noticed that your downtown, which is lovely next to the sound here, is it's an older part of town that you've kept preserved with older buildings and so on. I expect you get a lot of tourists. And I would expect that you have to think about then how do you make, in a sense, train tourists if there's a more pedestrian area where you provide parking that's away, or shuttles, or horse-drawn carts, or whatever you do.
The first step is the engineering. The largest chunk of any urban area land is the right-of-way.
Okay.
It's not the city parks, it's not the city buildings, it's the right-of-way. And how we develop the right-of-way, how we use that right-of-way can either make it, we can focus on cars and traffic, or we can focus on people and places. And luckily, we have a pre-automobile commercial downtown. Yep. Many people come here to see the buildings. I personally think that what they come here for is the pre-automobile pedestrian-friendly streets, where you can walk between buildings, you're not crossing large parking lots, you're not crossing driveways. The pedestrian is basically in a safe zone everywhere. People love to walk here.
Maybe that's part of why it's so friendly. Nevada City, like yours, about the same age, same thing. It was pre-automobile, and it's friendly that way.
We in this town really tend to love the community. We speak of our love of this community. I think part of that is the pedestrian friendliness gets us to the point where we're talking amongst each other on a regular basis. We have impromptu meetings all the time with people we didn't expect, impromptu of course, expect to meet, and we talk Local issues, we talk things in common, and I think that a pedestrian-friendly town is an adjunct and a requirement for good democracy too. So that there's a whole lot of things that kind of fall into place when you start building a town for walking and town for biking.
What you said at the beginning was so many of the problems we see in the world, it's about our transport systems. So when you turn that back around and you're strengthening that social web, be it democracy, be it neighbors helping each other, be it people with ideas, it's a very nice image.
Let me posit a theory. I'd love it if somebody would explore it. That walkable communities are generally a little more liberal and progressive because the people are talking to each other. The people are understanding each other. They're sharing. They're not afraid of their neighbors. Whereas a more car-oriented suburban-style development, people don't talk to each other. They're not aware of common concerns. There's a little bit of fear of their neighbors because they're not talking to them, and therefore they're a little more conservative.
And I would guess that there's more of a sense of other. You know, there's not the, you know, the other that we're afraid of or apprehensive about because we don't know them. I mean, if you pass somebody in the street, you know, at least saying hi, even if you don't know them, or at least beginning to get used to each other's faces.
I think by building a walkable community,
you can do that.
Towns can ultimately create the community that that everyone longs for. That connection with other. Remove that unknown. Remove that fear of the unknown. So that's another angle of this.
I think that's a fabulous. I hope somebody picks that thread up and does some research about, you know, how many times in the different cities, you know, how much time do you spend talking to somebody, you know, on a walkable community versus, you know, the suburban catastrophe, you know, driving from here to Walmart.
Well, is a suburb really a community? There's a question.
There. Looks to me like you've got a bunch of good questions for somebody to pursue. Meanwhile, you're doing a fine job here in starting to get people to walk and bike and to meet and counterbalance that automobile-centric world. Thanks for the good work. Thanks for the good work, and keep it up.
It's a pleasure to see it happening around me without my shoulder being behind it at this point. It kind of takes it has a life of its
shared.
own. Yes,
good.
It's shared.
Thank you for getting that seed started. Thanks for joining me. You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaia Donaldson. Join me next week.